Good evening, everybody. It's 6 o'clock, and we're going to go ahead and get started with our third Thursday. First off, I'd like to thank the team that put this together, particularly Ella, who did all the marketing, Gary, Dawn, who does the sponsorship, and Charlie Szymanski, who's done a huge amount to get this program off the ground, and his daughter, Sophie, who generally does the Zoom support, but she's unavailable tonight. We have an upcoming third Thursday, which is going to be July 15th. This is going to be a significant mission review. If you attended the last one, it was outstanding presentations by Salt Lake County and Inyo County Sheriff's Office. I have one currently lined up, and I'm looking for one more. So if you have a mission that would be worthy of something to be shared in the mountain rescue community, these are extremely beneficial. As you guys know, we actually don't tape these or share these, and that would allow folks to be more transparent on significant mission learning points. So please consider it if you've got a mission in the last year or two that would meet that criteria, and reach out to me specifically. So at this time, I'm going to have the president of Allegheny Mountain Rescue come on and talk about the conference we just had at Seven Springs Resort. Chris Roosh.
All right. Good evening, everybody. As Michael just said, we just had the spring conference last week here in Pennsylvania. I see lots of folks who were on the call were here at the conference. Just a couple recap things to let everybody know what was going on, and we're going to share some pictures while we're talking here. The final count was 220 people attended the conference from at least 95 different organizations and 3 countries. We had Mexico and Italy represented. Did all sorts of fun stuff. Steve Petty hung off a ski lift and showed us how to rescue people off of that. Had a bunch of different vendors, 17 different vendor booths at the conference. And of course, the highlight, as always, was our SAR Olympics that took place all over the mountain and had all sorts of fun things. So that's 2021 is a wrap, and now we're looking forward to next year's conference and turning it over to Larimer County in Estes Park. Save the dates for next year.
Perfect, Chris. If you stop your screen share, I can share my screen again. Just want to thank you for an outstanding job of running a conference. I saw a lot of people having a great time. And with that, Sandy, are you on this call tonight? So looking ahead, we have the 2021 MRA conference, which is going to be up in Larimer County in Estes Park. It should be an outstanding conference. We heard her speak at the meeting, and they already have planning well underway, and it's a beautiful location. So we hope you all consider it, and more information about the conference will follow soon. With that, I'd like to introduce Doug McCall, president of the Mountain Rescue Association.
Thanks, Michael. And thanks again, Allegheny Mountain Rescue Group, for hosting a very successful 2021 spring conference. As Chris mentioned, we're looking forward to next year at Larimer County already. Hopefully they won't have to plan it twice like Allegheny Mountain Rescue Group got the opportunity to. So just a couple quick things in the MRA. Want to welcome our new MRA officers. Chris Roosh from Allegheny Mountain Rescue Group is our Secretary Treasurer, and Andreas Schmidt-Sadi from Albuquerque Mountain Rescue is our new member at large. Also, as probably many of you know, we are part of the International Commission of Alpine Rescue. The MRA is a member, and we have delegates for terrestrial, air rescue, medical committee, and our avalanche committee. And in this last meeting, we elected delegates for medical and avalanche. And Dr. Allison Sheets from Rocky Mountain Rescue Group is the primary delegate for medical, and Dr. Christopher Van Tilburg from the Crag Rats is the alternate. And for avalanche committee, Michael Finger is the primary, and Ryan Clarico is the alternate. I mean, I'll just make a quick plug in case you missed any of the previous Third Thursdays or the DEI webinar. You can always get that on the MRA's YouTube channel. I'm not going to tell you to subscribe to it because that seems like a very YouTube thing to do. But if you do subscribe to it, you get notifications of when new content is presented. Other than that, I will turn it back over to you, Michael. Thank you all for coming to the Third Thursday. Looking forward to a fantastic program.
Thanks, Doug. Next, I'm going to unshare my screen. And Dawn Wilson, would you like to introduce our sponsor, Matt Hunt, tonight?
Absolutely. So Sterling Rope has been an MRA sponsor longer than I've been around, for sure. And if you were at the conference, you know that probably the funnest activity we did, Activity Station, was with Sterling Rope, with rope jousting. Oh, of course, my kids always come in right when I'm talking every time. So anyway, sorry, Matt, every time. Anyway, Matt Hunt is here to talk on behalf of Sterling Rope. They're amazing sponsors. As you know, they just did a contest for us a few months ago where 3 teams won spectacular gear. And with that, thanks, Matt. It's all yours.
Thanks, Dawn, and everybody else. Yeah, I was lucky enough to be at the conference, and big thanks to the Allegheny Mountain crew for putting that on. It was really well done. For those of you who weren't able to attend, one of the products we were talking about is a new 11mm static rope we've come out with, which is called the Sync. And the big deal with that is it's an 11mm, but it's got the NFPA G rating on it. So we're over 9,000 pounds on an 11mm. So that's a pretty fun all around rescue rope. And then I'll also give you like a little bit of a teaser. I was gonna have a video for you tonight, but I found out we're actually not quite ready to go to press with something. So all I can say is stay tuned as far as Sterling Rope goes on July 1st. We'll have a pretty exciting announcement coming up on the dynamic climbing rope side. So for any of y'all who are climbers out there, it should be a pretty neat thing. So stay tuned for that one. And thanks again for inviting us to Third Thursday, and enjoy the rest of the presentations.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'm going to reshare my screen now. So tonight, I'd like to introduce our course, which is going to be Search Theory at 10,000 feet. This presentation will introduce basic concepts of modern search theory and how they're integrated into the planning of the successful 2020 search of a missing snowboarder on Mount Rainier. Guy Mansfield, who's a PhD, has been active in search and rescue since 2008 as a member of Everett Mountain Rescue and the Suquamish County Volunteer Search and Rescue. He is deployed on SAR missions ranging from wilderness searches to technical rope rescue to disaster searches to urban searches for abducted children. Guy has served as an operations section chief and plan section chief on some of the largest searches in Northwest Washington State. He is currently the director of the Washington State SAR Planning Unit. Guy has a PhD from the Department of Behavioral Neuroscience at Oregon Health Sciences University, and he has presented at the national and international SAR conferences, has lectured on hiking safety at REI classes, has presented on international webinars in applied search theory, and has authored over a dozen scientific papers as well as several technical business articles. So with that, Guy, I'm going to unshare my screen, and we very much look forward to your presentation.
All right. That's better. It always helps if you unmute. Oh, thank you for that illustrious introduction. So good evening, everybody. You know, whenever anyone gets up in front of you, a group, and starts talking, I always think it's a really good idea to know something about their background. And just to very quickly reiterate what you heard. So I've got an academic background with careers that typically involved application of a variety of analytical methods. Hiking and climbing has been a passion of mine for most of my life. I've done a bunch of SAR stuff since 2008. And I've got a bunch of specialized training in search management, as well as some experience doing that. Now, over the last couple of years, or last number of years actually, I've gotten more and more involved in search planning, and this led to a personal interest in search theory. And as one of the directors of the Washington State SAR Planning Unit, I've been leading our team's efforts to apply search theory principles to real world incidents. And sometimes that's pretty straightforward, and sometimes it's not quite as straightforward. Anyway, let me start my slides. This is the point where we check to see if people can see my screen. So hang on just a sec. I'm going to turn off my video. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, this is the slide where we say, can everybody see the slide? And I need at least one person to say yes.
We do see it, Dr.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right. Let's get going here. I want to turn on my magical pointer. All right. You seeing the magical pointer?
Yeah, we got it.
Okay, great. All right. Now all we got to do is see if we advance the slides and we'll be in good shape. All right. So what I'd like to do tonight is to present a high level view from 10,000 feet, if you will, of the main concepts of modern search theory. Before continuing though, I really need to give credit to those who I have learned from. That'd be Dr. Don Cooper, Dr. Bob Kester, Skip Stoffel and his son Brett, Hugh Dower, and really others who have led the teaching of search planning for many years. These folks are the real experts, and really I'm merely a storyteller. And my purpose tonight is not to turn you into search theory experts, nor require you to think about search theory on your next mission, but just to familiarize you with some of the key concepts. And I'm going to do that mostly using the context of a search in November of last year for a missing snowshoer on Mount Rainier. Okay, here we go. Now, search theory can appear complicated, and in some cases it sort of is, but I want to begin by making the case that for the most part, it's merely an extension of what most of us already do in search planning. So in 2019, I helped plan the rescue of 4 climbers who were trapped high on the Liberty Ridge route of Mount Rainier. They've been spotted by the Helo, but bad weather and storm systems prevented rescue by either ground or air. And most of our planning, in fact, in the operations center was just watching the forecast to see if a good weather window might come by. And finally, we got a break in the weather, and the Helo flew, and they flew back to the last known position on the ridge where they'd been spotted earlier, but the climbers were gone. So that wasn't good news. But one of the climbing rangers, Thomas, he was up in the Helo, and he had an idea that may have contributed to saving their lives. And he said, you know, there's a chance that they pushed up for the summit. And sure enough, the Helo flew up high and spotted them and was able to land and pluck them off the summit safely. Now this, Thomas's speculation here or suggestion, there's a chance they pushed for the summit. This is actually an informal probability statement. And what we'll see tonight is that search theory is a formalization of probability statements and a way to combine them in a systematic way. So tonight I'm going to use a more recent SAR incident at Mount Rainier as the background for my introduction. And for those of you not familiar with this incident, this was a search for Michael Napinski. He was a snowshoer on the Muir Snowfield. And for those not familiar, the Muir Snowfield climb starts at the Paradise parking lot, ascends the Muir Snowfield up to Camp Muir, which is about here, 10,000 feet. And that's the usual overnight stopping place for one of the very popular routes to the summit of Mount Rainier. But a lot of folks and a lot of pretty much unprepared day hikers attempt this route as well. Because of that, the Muir Snowfield is an area in Mount Rainier that has probably the highest rate in searches and rescues. In this particular incident, Michael separated from his partner at about 9,500 feet and then became lost on his descent in really bad weather. Fortunately, he was found the next day severely hypothermic, transported by Helo to a local medical center where, I mean, really heroic efforts in modern medicine brought him back from the brink of death. So this was a mission that could have gone really bad, but ended up having a pretty good outcome. Now, I want to make it clear right off that my message tonight is not that search theory was the key to finding this lost snowshoer. And what we'll see is that search theory was one component of search planning that actually integrated a number of different types of input. So for example, ranger expertise and their knowledge of the terrain and past incidents was an important input into our search planning. Lost person behavior and the use of statistics from historical SAR incident data was another important input. Applied search theory that I'll be talking about tonight was an input to our search planning. And what I will call situational awareness also contributed importantly to our search planning. So with that in mind, I think it's important to consider when different search planning methods are used. And the good news is that historically, over 90% of searches are resolved by what's sometimes called just reflex tasking. And in this approach, we combine terrain analysis with thinking about lost person behavior with local knowledge to identify sort of routine search tasks. You know, basically, it's let's look in the most likely places. And it's the case that only a small percentage of sort of hardcore cases that warrant the full application of applied search theory. And so using search theory is sort of like calling out the National Guard. I mean, you use it when things are pretty bad and you're going into multiple operational periods to try to locate the subject. All right, so let's begin with a historical perspective. The origins of search theory actually date back to the 1700s when a fellow named John Bayes described a mathematical statistical approach. And it is the case that the math underpinnings are pretty complex, but the conceptual process of what is now called the Bayesian method is shown here, and it's pretty easy to understand. And it begins with initial assumptions and information. And you first make what's called an initial statement of beliefs. Then you go out into the world and obtain objective data, which you use to then adjust those initial statements of beliefs. And I'll read the quote here. Bayes' rule is simple. By updating our initial belief about something with objective new information, we get a new and improved belief. And so each cycle improves our statement of beliefs. So let's see how formal search theory is actually based on this Bayesian approach. We begin with information and assumptions such as incident scenarios and terrain analysis. We then make statements about what we'll see is called probability of area in search regions or segments. We go out into the world and we search and we calculate probability of detection, which we'll be talking about tonight. And we use probability of detection to calculate what's called residual probability of area, or how much probability is now left in our search areas. This is the big picture of how Bayesian Bayesian methods applied to search planning works. So a little bit more history here. One of the first successful uses of search theory was actually during World War II in the search for German U-boats across large ocean areas. And it allowed Allied forces to search higher probability areas first, and actually contributed to winning the war. And another thing I'll mention, it's important to understand, excuse me, that search theory is not just a theoretical concept. It is the standard method used today by the Coast Guard and Air Force for marine searches. For example, it was applied internationally in the global search for the missing MH370, the Malaysian airline. And then over many years, what started out as maritime search theory concepts have been adopted to apply to land search operations. So what questions can search theory help us answer? And the most important one, I think, is where should we search first? And we'll see that the concept of probability of area is the concept that helps us answer this question. And so in this example map, we've used some of the principles of search theory. We have rated and ranked the probability of our search segments. And in this case, for a presentation to the incident commander that's easily understandable, we've thermally coded the higher probability segments here in red and orange. This can be used as input in making decisions about which segments to search first. Search theory can also be used to answer the question, how effective has our searching been? And at the end of any particular operational period, it can help answer the question, well, okay, where should we search next? So as I've said, Bayesian search theory is founded on some pretty complex mathematics, but fortunately for both myself and everybody else, we really don't need to absorb, excuse me, all that math to use search theory. With training, we can just use the principles at an operational level and just follow the guidelines and procedures based on search theory. And so again, my goal for these sessions is not to make everybody a search theory expert or have you be practicing that in the field, but just to give you an understanding of why search planners are sending you into that steep ravine filled with Devil's Club. All right, so let's return to the search for Michael Lipinski. As I said before, a critical component of planning was ranger knowledge of past SAR incidents on the Muir Snowfield. And in a sense, planning for the Lipinski SAR started really over 2 years ago when I worked with the National Park Rangers to create a SAR pre-plan for the Muir Snowfield. This was inspired, among other things, by an almost identical incident in 2018 when a lost snowshoer also separated from his companions at about 8,000 or 9,000 foot level on the Muir Snowfield, attempted to descend alone, got stuck in bad weather or darkness, and actually perished on the descent. And so we put together a pre-plan that encapsulated and organized knowledge about previous incidents and included recommendations about pre-planned assignments for hasty searching and for ground searching. So that, for example, if new rangers came on board and when we have the next search on the Muir Snowfield, this is a very handy reference. I'll point out that our Muir Snowfield pre-plan also specifically recommended air searches for areas too hazardous or too difficult for ground teams to search. And again, these were based on ranger input from past search missions. And I'll just note here that one of the pre-planned aerial searches was over the Nisqually Glacier Basin, glacier and river basin here. Okay. Yeah, so here's the assignment. Helo 1, overfly the Nisqually Glacier Basin at about these altitudes. Okay, all right. So another component of our planning for the Lipinski search was analysis of lost person behavior. And so initially, based on this category of person, there's actually a category for snowshoer. We plotted the statistical distances, also known as range rings. And this diagram indicates that for past incidents, 50% of the subjects were found within a mile of the point last seen, and 95% within 3 miles. And this just gave us sort of reference guidelines to think about search areas. We also noted from the lost person behavior data, which incidentally you can get in a phone app, which is really great, that in 75% of historical incidents, the subjects were found downhill from the PLS. Now, admittedly, this was not exactly rocket science since we knew the subject's destination was back down here at Paradise. All right. So for the Lipinski SAR, initial hasty searching was conducted Saturday night in really rapidly deteriorating weather. This is up on snowfields with very low visibility. And the assignments for the next day were based on, again, the experience-based pre-plan, ranger input, based on a possible sighting somewhere a little bit lower down that we weren't too sure about. And so Sunday morning, we deployed 6 MRA teams from the Puget Sound area. They started at Paradise, and their assignments were to search these search segments. We did have a planned Helo assignment here in purple, but that was delayed, grounded by bad weather. All right, so now with our initial search teams deployed, it's time to think about search theory. So I want to start by thinking about the basic idea of probability. It is the foundation for all of search theory, but can be a concept that's sometimes a little bit hard to get your head around. So I've stolen this simple diagram from a very interesting book called Math with Bad Drawings. And we can think of probability as a scale of values between 0 and 1, where 0 in technical terms means it just ain't going to happen. And 1 in technical terms mean it's definitely going to happen. And you can see that between these values, we have, probably not going to happen, well, maybe, and probably. And you can also see that probability is also described as in terms of percent chance. So 0% chance, 50-50 chance, 100% chance, okay? Just like we see every day in our weather reports. So that's the basic concept of probability. All right, so now let's dive into the concept of probability of area. This is really the starting point for all of the search theory concepts. So imagine that we're looking for a lost $100 bill, and it might be in region A, and it might be in region B. And so if we've only got the time or the resources to search one region, how could probability of area help us decide which region to search? Okay, well, let's take a look at this. All right, now in this picture, let's say we've done some analysis and have estimated that the probability of area of region A is 70. In other words, 70 out of 100 chances of finding that $100 bill are in region A, whereas only 30 out of 100 chances are in region B. All right, so based on these probabilities, I mean, which region does everybody want to search first? Okay, I don't know about you guys, but I'm searching in region A. So one way to formalize estimation of probability of area is to use what's called a proportion-based consensus. This is an improved version of Matson consensus, which some of you may have heard of. And we did use this during the Lipinski search. It sounds a little bit complicated, but it's basically a process for combining the expertise and judgment of multiple individuals in a fair way. So the first step is to draw search planning regions that roughly correspond to scenarios. So for example, region M here might correspond to the scenario that, well, for some reason, the subject wandered way off to the east. Region G here might correspond to the scenario that, well, the subject may have somehow gotten into the Nisqually Glacier Basin. So we have a planning region that sort of supports each scenario. And then the next step is we go through a formal consensus process, which I don't need to describe in detail, but the output of that will be a rank ordered list of search segments that again, fairly combines everybody's input. And we can see, for example, in this example, that regions G and F got the highest POA scores. And so once again, we can represent that on a thermal map. Again, easily understandable by a busy incident commander, where red and orange have the highest POA scores. Okay. And this is actually the map we used for the Lipinski search. All right. Well, okay, so far so good, but we'll see there's a way to be even smarter about probability modeling. And in this diagram, we've now got 4 search regions, A, B, C, and D. And region A and B have POA values of 40. C and D have POA values of 10. Notice that the sum of these is 100%, okay? And the implication is that we feel that there's 100% probability that our subject is somewhere within the boundary of our 4 search regions. Okay, now you can see that if we prioritized our search based on POA alone, we'd assign equal probabilities to region A and region B. The way to be smarter, though, is to consider the concept of probability density, which quantifies not only how many units of probability are in each region, but how tightly packed or how concentrated they are. And you can see here, if you look at regions A and B, they both have POAs of 40, but because region B is half the size, the probability here is much more densely packed. In other words, it's a much richer probability environment. And so based on probability density, again, we'd be very interested in searching region B first. Well, okay, so far so good, but imagine now that we have two search segments that have equal POA and equal probability density. Is there a way to be even smarter about prioritizing where we deploy searchers? And the answer to this is yes. So not only do we want to search the richer areas first, based on probability density, but we can also use a concept called probable success rate. And that allows us to consider, in addition, factors, the factors team speed and team sweep width, and allow us to estimate the search team efficiency. So we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail on the next slide. Okay. So the way to think about probable success rate is to imagine that search teams sweep up these units of probability as they pass through a search area. So as shown in this highly technical diagram, we can visualize the search team as a little Pac-Man gobbling up units of probability as they go through their assignment and leaving a swath of sort of cleaned out searched area. And so we can estimate and quantify probability of success simply by multiplying together the three factors. What's the probability density? What's the speed at which the team can move through the area? And what's the team's sweep width? And you can think for now of sweep width roughly as what's the team's sort of detection range side to side. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail in a second. So we in the Lipinski search, we did not use PSR to prioritize assignments. And the main reason for that is we didn't feel we had good estimates for sweep width across the snowfields. A little bit more on that later. But here's an example of where we did use PSR during planning for a search in June of 2020 for a lost hiker above Rampart Ridge on Mount Rainier. And so here, for each search segment, we had the probability density, we had an estimated sweep width, we had a team speed, and when we multiply those three all together, we got a number which represented probable success rate. We were able to rank segments by probable success rate. And once again, I like to do color coding. We could display this on the map with higher with thermal coding indicating the segments in which search teams could sweep up more probability per unit time, because that's what we're after. We really want to have our search teams go out and sweep up more probability per unit time. That's the key concept. All right, now getting back to the Lipinski search, it's really important to mention that situational awareness also played a role in this search. We had alert MRA teams who located snowshoe tracks that appeared to be appropriate for our subject. And we got them on the radio and asked them to give us a direction of travel. We then plotted that, and based on historical data from lost person behavior, we plotted what's called dispersion angles, and these could continue a greater distance than shown here. But you can see from this diagram that this is one of the factors that was increasing our interest in the Nisqually River Basin here. And remember, we did have a predefined Helo assignment here. So we were really definitely getting interested in this area. All right, so outcome of the search: in early afternoon, the weather finally cleared enough so that our contract Helo could fly. They did locate the subject. I'm going to point out here the relationship between subject location and our dispersion angle here. But there was no place to land nearby. So the incident commander redirected the search teams to reassemble at Paradise, drive down the road, and start working their way up the nasty terrain in the basin here to reach the subject. They did reach the subject in the early afternoon. And I have to tell you, we were monitoring the radio, and I was impressed listening to our MRA guys on the radio. I mean, it was so apparent that they knew what to do. They knew how to assess the patient. They knew how to begin treatment for hypothermia. I mean, that was very comforting to hear in the incident command center. At the same time, we called for support from Naval Air Station Whidbey. They had a Helo which had hoist gear. They arrived at the subject location about 3 p.m. We were able to hoist the subject directly out and flew them directly to Harborview, where again his life was saved just in time. All right, but what if he had not been located? What if we had needed to continue the search theory the next day? So this is where we would begin to bring in the next set of search theory tools. So the rangers at Mount Rainier are really pretty good about following a formal search planning cycle called the Planning P. So in the early afternoon, this is prior to locating the subject, we actually held a planning meeting to get us set up for the next day. And one of the important decisions we had to make was, do we research previously searched areas, or do we need to expand our searching into new areas? And so we began by asking ourselves, well, what did we think about the ability to detect a subject partially covered by snow? And we decided that actually that ability was probably pretty low. And so that we were going to need to research some of the initial search areas. And this was pretty informal and pretty subjective, but search theory actually provides a more objective way to do this. So let's take a look at that. And that's using the concept of probability of detection. And this gives us a more objective way to answer the question, how effective has our searching been? So remember if you remember our highly technical diagram here, the concept is as searchers move through the area, they're gobbling up units of probability. And we can see that there's actually a way we can calculate how many units of probability are gobbled up by a search team, which leads us to a new and improved way to calculate POD. And what I'm talking about here is after searching. We're addressing the question, how effective has our searching been? So in the past, POD has been estimated subjectively, sort of based on a team's experience on the ground. And I think many of us will remember being asked during debriefing, well, what's the likelihood that you would have located the subject had they been in your assigned area? And we've all answered, well, it was dark and swampy and brushy and we couldn't see our hand in front of our face. But I think our POD was about 40%. Now, it turns out that it's been shown that these subjective estimates are too wildly variable and unreliable to be of much use. So in modern search theory, we calculate POD based on objective factors. And the central objective factor is called sweep width, sometimes known as effective sweep width. Sweep width turns out to be a number that quantifies the concept that as search teams move through an area along this path, for example, they sweep out units of probability. They reduce the probability that the subject is in this area. And one thing that's important to note here, and again, you can think of these little yellow dots here as units of probability. Here's our reduced probability after the path. But notice that the assumption is that no search sensor is perfect. Even after this sweep, we're leaving undetected units of probability behind. And that's important. All right. So sweep width can be thought of loosely as a measure of detection width of a searcher. And that can be a human searcher, a canine, or a UAV. And you can see that it makes sense that different types of search sensors looking for different types of targets in different types of terrain are going to have different sweep widths. So for example, an air scent canine searching for a lost child in open terrain may have an extremely wide sweep width. A human looking for that same lost child in the same terrain is going to have a narrower sweep width. A human looking for the same lost child, but in thick brush or woods, again, narrower sweep width still. And on an extreme example might be a human remains detection dog searching for old bones in an evidence search. In there, the sweep width may be a few feet or even less. I'll briefly mention that for human searchers, there's a quick and reasonable way to estimate sweep width in the field. It's called average range of detection, or AROD. Takes about 5 minutes, can be easily taught. Basically, you place your target object in the center. You have members of your team walk away till they can't see it, walk back till they can see it, and then you average these detection differences. Now, it's a bit more complicated than that, but not too much more complicated than that. Now, this can be done by search teams just as they enter their search segment. The trick there is people typically don't have much patience for that, and they want to just dash off and do their searching. So if you have alert and helpful search planners in your unit, they can actually go out in advance and pre-measure sweep width using this same exercise. And that can be really handy. All right. So a couple more steps in getting from sweep width to probability of detection, just quickly. So if we've estimated our sweep width, how do we get to POD? The first step is, next intermediate step is to compute area effectively swept, which sounds complex, but isn't. It's simply the area of the buffer or worm shape that the team has swept out. And you get that simply by taking the length of the team track, multiplying it times the width, which is the sweep width. And we know that length times width is going to give us the area of this oddly shaped polygon here. So that's pretty straightforward. All right. Then we need to get from area effectively swept to coverage. And I know this is, I'm going to acknowledge that these are the geekiest slides of the entire presentation, but we're almost through the geeky slides here, so hang on. So from area effectively swept to coverage, again, this is a straightforward concept. It's simply what percent of the area has been swept out by our search team. And to get that, you simply divide the area effectively swept by the segment area to get coverage. So for example, if your searchers swept out 25 acres of a 50-acre search segment, that'd be a coverage of 50%. The last step then is to get probability of detection. And here it does get a bit tricky. How do we get from coverage to POD? And what we need to do is actually rely on a mathematical curve based on experiments. And the way it works conceptually is we use this curve and we read, we read where our coverage was. This would be a coverage of 100%. We read up the curve and then we read over and read off our probability of detection, which is about 62% here, okay? So 2 observations at this point. I know some folks are thinking, well, hang on a minute. If we get 100% coverage, how come the POD is only 60 odd percent? And the main reason for that is, remember, our sweep width, which is used in these calculations, assumes that the search is imperfect, that you're leaving units of probability behind. And the second observation is nobody has to carry this graph around with them. All of these calculations are put into easy to use spreadsheets. And certainly it's the planners back in command that are fooling with these spreadsheets, not the teams out in the field. All right. So now that we know how to calculate probability of detection, how is it used to quantify search effectiveness? So remember, again, when a team searches an area, only one of two things happens. You either find the subject or the likelihood that the subject in that area is reduced. So in this example, in segment 1, prior to searching, we've calculated the probability of area is 40. And let's say we search through that area and we calculate our POD to be 50%, okay? And then conceptually, we've removed 50% of this original POA, leaving a residual POA of only 20. And that's how we model how much probability gets searched out of an area. And this, incidentally, is why planners will bug you for your GPS tracks. We need to know how long your search path was in the area. And so from those GPS tracks, we can do at least two things. One, we can plot those on the map, like this search up in near Snoqualmie Pass, and we can see areas that didn't get covered very well. And then we can also use track line length, which is this, times sweep width, to calculate POD for that search. All right, and this is how this all comes together in a spreadsheet. So remember, we're making some initial statements about segment POAs. We're going out and doing searching in the world. We're bringing back your tracks and using those to calculate POD. And that allows us to compute residual POA, or how much probability is left in each segment. Let's take a look at an example in this spreadsheet here. So for segment 1, we started with initial POA of 40%. We calculated the POD as 50%. We calculated our residual POA at 20% here. Oh, excuse me. Our residual POA of 20% here. And so notice one thing now, and here's where these concepts provide additional valuable information. We've searched all of these segments, and you could say, well, you know, we've searched segment 1, why do we need to search it again? If we look at residual POA, this tells us that the largest amount of leftover or probability still out there is still hanging in segment 1. So that's the one that would be a priority to research. So again, you can see how using these concepts to plan for the next operational period provides a better answer to the question, where should we search next? All right, so I'm going to end with a summary picture of the search planning cycle. So as we've seen, the starting point is estimating the amount of probability in each area. And we can use a concept called probable success rate to model a number which tells us in which segments can we search out the maximum quantity of probability in the least amount of time, okay, because we want to be most efficient in our search. We use probability of detection to help us answer the question, well, how much probability was searched out of each segment, which feeds back into residual POA, how much probability remains in each area, which then again feeds into the next planning cycle for the next operational period. All right, so I'm going to close by addressing an important question, and that's, can search theory concepts be applied to the unique characteristics of searching mountain terrain? And the answer for the most part is basically yes. All of these concepts can be applied to just about any type of terrain. In mountain terrains, we do need to pay extra attention to how we estimate sweep width and team speed. It's important, as I said, to make efforts to capture team tracks and to provide those tracks back to the folks in command as soon after the assignment ends as possible. And I'll put a sort of a pet peeve plug in here. So using an app on your phone and emailing in the tracks the next day really doesn't help with planning for the next operational period. Right. But the bottom line is, if we're thoughtful and careful about this, we can apply search theory to model probability in mountain environments. All right, so thanks for hanging in there. I know some of the slides got a little bit geeky. I should mention that, you know, during this presentation, I've simplified some of the issues. I've admitted some complexities, and there are still some interesting controversies in the world of search theory. And it is the case that applying some of these concepts in the real world at incident command, I mean, certainly involves some challenges. You need more and more trained personnel. And I don't want to leave the impression that everything is simple and easy to do, but we found that it really adds value to our searching efforts. All right, so we should have time to entertain questions at this point.
Guy, thank you very much. And one of the things that I forgot to put in is, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. And then Guy, if you want to just read them from there, looks like Charlie Szymanski had the first one.
Yes, hang on just a sec. I'm going to bring up my chat window. Chat coming up, hang on. Okay, I'm getting here. Okay. How do you, that's, oh no, I see. I got to scroll up to the top. So stand by.
Yeah, so you want to go to about 6:25 p.m. is the first question.
Okay, thank you for that reference. There we go. The question is, high probability areas are based on our own assumptions. When we search and search again those high probability areas without finding the clues, got to enlarge my window here. Okay, that's better. How do you suggest we look at and reevaluate our earlier assumptions?
Dr. Mansfield, it's Charlie. I can elaborate a little bit. What
Yeah,
I mean
that'd be good. Go ahead. By all means, elaborate.
Yeah, in my own experience in search management, if we go a couple operational periods searching high probability areas and don't find something, we tend to regroup and sit down and say, okay, what assumptions did we make, for example, that made some of the lower probability areas low probability? And if we blow up those assumptions, how would we change our search? And I think back to one search we had a decade or two ago, where we had low probability areas because we didn't think the lost teenager from a teenage adventure camp would cross a road. She was lost, and we didn't think she would ever cross a road. And as it turns out, she did cross the road and continued back up into the hills instead of walking down the road, because she had just an innate fear of strangers and was hoping search and rescue were safe people. They will find me, but I don't want to be found by somebody on the road. So the minute somebody said, you know what, we should blow up the assumption that she didn't cross the road and we should look on the other side of the road, and bada bing, bada boom, there she was. So when I say, you know, when we search areas again and again, how do you suggest we look at and reevaluate our earlier assumptions? That's kind of what I meant. You know, how do you get together to say, what assumptions did we make in the first operational period that we should reconsider? I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, that's a really good thought. The formal way to handle that is that you'd go back to your early in the whole process, taking a look at your scenarios and possibly revise the planning regions that you've drawn, and then you'd redo your estimates of planning region POA. And then you sort of have to turn the crank on all your calculations. So that's one way to do it. Now that's pretty tedious, but procedurally that would be a correct thing to do.
Cool, thanks.
But again, often in sort of in situations like that, in the real world, you're operating, or at least in my experience, we're sort of operating with sort of a blend of this sort of formalized probability modeling and informal thinking and sort of blending them all in sort of dynamically in real time. So, all right, so let's see, there is, how do you account for a moving subject? Again, initially, I think that would be, you'd want to make sure I had identified that possibility as one of your scenarios. And in thinking about that, again, reassessing, has the subject now possibly moved farther away from the initial PLS? Again, you might end up reevaluating the initial probability of areas for your regions based on that. So actually, I need to jump back. Let's see. A comment. Some search theorists talk about, instead of POA, POC, which is basically the same thing. POC stands for probability of containment. What I've heard is that there are sort of minute theoretical differences between those concepts, but basically in operational terms, who cares? Emphasizing PSR, yes, I talked about probable success rate. Yes, okay, good. So then also Bob Kester gave a presentation about his new FIND software that does the PSR shifting calculations and recalculate the heat map. Yes, so Bob and his team have been working on a search planning and operations management product called FIND for a number of years now. And he is basically just now making it available to folks. Our team in Washington State recently signed a contract with Bob to acquire FIND software, and we are in the process of evaluating it. And in a nutshell, and I'm probably oversimplifying here, so Bob, forgive me. The functions that FIND provides it provides a mapping function. It's not as good as SARTOPO, which is our go-to mapping application. It provides built-in lost person behavior statistics and incorporates those into search planning. It calculates the POA, probability density, and PSR concepts that I've been talking about for you automatically after you've drawn what I call planning regions and I call search segments. And then it also has built in a lot of operational support. So theoretically, a team could use FIND from the beginning to the end. It's not quite strong supporting multiple operational periods yet. We're sort of working on that. And I'm just seeing a comment popped up in the Appalachian Search and Rescue Conference. They're tentatively planning on using both SARTOPO and FIND together. And that, I think that's spot on. That's exactly what our team is planning on doing. In fact, we're in the process of sort of building up a matrix of how do we do things today without FIND? How would we do things tomorrow using SARTOPO and FIND side by side? And here's the good part. How would we use SARTOPO and FIND if we can convince Bob to get to the point where we can transfer some mapping objects between SAR-topo and find, which we think would really be the bee's knees in technical terms. If we could get to that point, then I think we've got something really hot. So we're very interested in find, and we're actively involved in getting our hands on and figuring out how to optimize it and how Bob's team can optimize it in the future. So then another one has popped up. This is a good question. So sweep width can vary through the search segment, within a search segment with terrain and vegetation differences. Yeah, so that is, I should read the rest of the question. How is this variation handled in coverage calculations? So this represents a real operational or computational hassle. So one way to sort of avoid this is to see if you can design search segments where the terrain and vegetation is as uniform as possible. Now, clearly that's not always going to be possible. And then you're stuck with sort of averaging things out. Remember, no matter how formal the search theory is, we're always dealing with some estimation and sort of averaging things out. And it introduces some, certainly introduces a certain amount of error. Now, I will also mention that in the find, this reminds me, in find software, Bob's team has built in a POD calculator tool, which allows you to enter really a wide variety of variables, such as how experienced was your search team? Was it dark or light? Were people tired or fresh? What was the training level of the team? And that all gets calculated in the find application. And it's based on data that Bob has collected and has in the background, and helps calculate a more precise probability of detection. So that's another function of the find software that we are looking at very closely. And it's something that you just couldn't do without an application like that. So then a question, you mentioned probability density in addition to POA. From a search management perspective, do you ever resize segments to optimize POA across the map, based on expected search team members? That is a consideration. We generally don't worry about that. We do sometimes something like, okay, team one, you're assigned to the north side of this segment from this line up, and team two, you're assigned to the south side. I don't know. And let me know if I'm answering this question. I'm not quite sure. I did that very well. Feel free to re-ask that question if I didn't get it. Okay, so again, I'm happy to take any more questions if anybody has any, if we got any survivors left.
Guy, you did a great job. We still have 49 people on, and everybody stayed engaged at a max of 53. So I think
that's amazing.
Everybody's staying on. So just checking to see if anybody has any questions. And Guy, I'm just going to encourage you to stay on for a few more minutes so people can just talk to you. We'll leave the chat open.
I will do that. And should I stop sharing my slides now? Yes, I probably should.
You can stop sharing your slides, and everybody on the call, you're welcome to jump on and ask Guy any additional questions.
So I attended, this is John Soul with Weber County Search and Rescue in Ogden, Utah. And I attended the MRA session at the conference where Coster was talking about his Find app and stuff like that. One of the things he kept talking about was SARCAT. SARCAT seems to be a sort of after the mission thing. I didn't quite follow all that. What's the difference between SARCAT and Find, and where does that fit in? When I went to the GitHub site, most of it was just the stuff that was on GitHub to stick on your own local server was gibberish.
Yeah, I don't know about SARCAT, but I know that Find is the application that Bob's team's been working on for a number of years now. And it may be an older application that Bob has used, but I basically don't know the answer to that.
Okay. No, the SARCAT was something he's actively developing now. And when I say that a lot of the verbiage was gibberish, it was that standard Microsoft Ipsum, Yopsum stuff that they stick in as just.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And so it seemed like it was some sort of data capture system. But I'm guessing that it was something that is still very much under development, and he hasn't. There's no real. It's not ready for prime time yet. Is my takeaway. I just didn't know.
Okay. So I mean, I can just pure speculation. So one of the foundational elements of Bob's software is all of the historical lost person behavior data. And so traditionally he gets that out of the ISRID database, and the inputs to that are sort of okay, but I mean, it's like they're contributed by multiple organizations under different conditions. And it may be that he's working on a better way to get and collect SAR incident data. Pure speculation on my part.
Yeah, I have an online find. This is Dean Knapp, Alaska. First, it says this version is no longer available to new customers, but it says SARCAT is an online records management system for search and rescue teams to record and summarize their team's SAR mission activity. SARCAT includes a web GIS and database to visualize and query records, as well as to submit them to the International Search and Rescue Incident Database with the push of a button.
Okay, all right.
Hmm.
So it facilitates data capture, which Bob would really like. So
I'll put that link in the chat.
Yeah, I just saw another helpful comment that popped up. It says it's worth mentioning that with SARTopo, you can download your tracks either by cell or when you get back to base. And what that's referring to is there's a relatively new, well, let me back up a little bit. So SARTopo is a mapping program developed by Matt Jacobs, who's a SAR guy out of California. And he and his team have done just an excellent job. In my opinion, this is the go-to mapping program for search and rescue. He has developed a phone app version. I think it's called CalTopo. And if you set things up right, and I won't go into the details, you can have your search team members with their CalTopo apps on their phone. And as they go into the field, if their phone is connected to sort of the central search map, you can actually see their positions in real time. It will automatically upload their search tracks to the search map, which is super helpful for us planners. If they go out of contact and then come back in range, it will sync up those tracks automatically. And it's a very helpful mode to be operating in. Much better than, I mean, I know in recent years, like the Gaia app on iPhones has gotten popular. The problem with that is we can't get tracks until people mail them in, email them in, you know, later in the day or even the next morning, and that just doesn't work out very well, as I said. But the the model of using SARTopo as your main mapping app and CalTopo in the field is a very attractive one for a variety of reasons. And someone just pointed out that that on the CalTopo website, they've got some really excellent videos and training material now. It used to be pretty sparse in terms of their help site, but in recent years, they've expanded it substantially, and there's a lot of good information on how to set that up. Okay. All right, so I'll just hang around a little bit and we can, Doug, is there other meeting stuff that needs to be done or?
Nope. It's just the training that you presented tonight.
Okay.
I think.
I just.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just put in the chat. CalTopo also did a third Thursday presentation. I was looking for it on the site. I was going to try to put the link, but you can find it on that initial link.
Okay.
That I had put in.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, Guy, I'm going to let you go.
Okay.
Instead of sitting in awkward silence, thank you so much for an excellent presentation.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Guy. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Guys.